everybody. My name is Mel. I'm the CEO of the Canadian Australian Chamber of Commerce. Really excited to be here. This is our very first inaugural event for the Young Professionals Committee. So I'm really excited to be able to open that up. The committee just started last year. They've done some amazing work. They're continuing to do amazing work. And so we have some of them here today. Some of them are hidden, you can't see, that have helped to create this conversation. So without further ado, we're gonna get going. I just wanna make sure everyone is here. I wanna invite Jordan and Vanya from the committee. They're going to be giving the acknowledgement of country this morning for Australia or this evening for Canada. So Jordan, over to you for the English acknowledgement of country.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. The custom of acknowledging and paying respect to country has been carried out in Australia for tens of thousands of years. The CACC would like us all to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are located and pay our respects to their ancestors and elders past and present. In Melbourne, where I'm located, we are on the traditional land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and future. The CACC would also like to acknowledge others who have joined the meeting today from the ancestral territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples of Canada. We would also like to acknowledge these people and their territories and ask us all to reflect on how we have benefited from their continued care and custodianship of their territories. The CACC believes that it is important for us to understand that our living and working on Indigenous lands places a significant burden on country and on its custodians, and for all us to try and lessen that burden as much as we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Jordan. Jordan comes to us from Melbourne, and now we have Vanya from Montreal.
Hey. Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. I'll continue in French. So, la tradition de reconnaître et de rendre hommage au pays est pratiquée en Australie depuis des dizaines de milliers d'années. La CACC aimerait que nous prenions tous un moment pour reconnaître les gardiens traditionnels de la terre sur laquelle nous nous trouvons et rendre hommage à leurs ancêtres et à leurs aînés passés et présents. La CACC souhaite également reconnaître les personnes qui se sont jointes à la réunion aujourd'hui en provenance des territoires ancestraux, des Premières Nations, des Métis et des Inuits du Canada. Nous aimerions également rendre hommage à ces peuples et à leurs territoires et nous demander de réfléchir à la façon dont nous avons bénéficié de leurs soins continus et de la garde de ces territoires. La CACC croit qu'il est important que nous comprenions que le fait de vivre et de travailler sur les territoires autochtones impose un fardeau important au pays et à ses gardiens et que nous essayons tous d'alléger ce fardeau autant que possible. Thank you. Back to you, Mel.
Thank you. Merci, Vanya. Appreciate that. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the keynote speaker for this discussion, and then I'm going to hand over the reins to Lori, who's our moderator that will engage with all three speakers. And she's also the co-chair of the Young Professionals Committee. So Clark Goodman, he is the Director of International Experience Canada. We refer to it as IEC for short, so Australia loves to shorten things. IEC supports Canada's cultural and economic interests by facilitating bilateral arrangements that provide Canadian youth with the opportunity to work and travel in over 30 partner countries and territories. So it's not just between Australia and Canada, there's 30. Clark manages a diverse portfolio of files in Ottawa and Toronto and worked in the private sector prior to joining the civil service. Clark is a graduate of Concordia University and the University of Ottawa. So thank you, Clark, so much for joining. I know it's late over there, so I do appreciate you. It's hard to get all the time zones together, so it's convenient. So over to you.
Thank you, Melissa. It's great to be here, and I'd like to welcome all the participants for attending this virtual session. So as you heard, my name is Clark Goodman. I am the Director of International Experience Canada. Canada's flagship program for youth mobility. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Ottawa, the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. So as Mel mentioned, we have agreements with over 30 countries, including Australia. And these programs allow youth to work and travel in various places and come to Canada as well. In particular, the agreement with Australia has been in place a long time. In fact, it's been there for 47 years, making it one of the oldest agreements that we have. Australia is a popular destination for Canadian youth, and the same for the Australians that love to come to Canada. You often find them on ski hills out in Western Canada, working and skiing out there. I was in Whistler recently, meeting with actually the Whistler Chamber of Commerce, and they underlined how important it was for young professionals and working holiday travelers in general for their economy and what it brings to the region in terms of just the cultural divergence of people from Australia and New Zealand, for example. In 2019, pre-COVID, there were about 7,300 Australian youth who came to work and travel in Canada, and 6,800 Canadians that went to Australia. So making it the most traveled to country out of all our country partners. So what is the value added in this bilateral agreement? What is the return on investment? Why do our countries have these? And really, it comes down to simply the open work permit that Canadians get when they go to Australia and Australians get when they come to Canada. In the absence of an agreement such as this, you normally wouldn't allow youth to show up at your border and say, hey, I want to come into your country and work for up to a year and work as much as I want, as little as I want, further my career, make contacts. Typically, when you're a worker wanting to come into a country, you're coming in for a very specific reason, to fill a labor gap. However, this is by and large a cultural program that ensures that youth from all parts of our society are able to participate. And they can do so by being able to work and pay their own way. And I think the work aspect is really important because through the work, you really get to understand a different culture. You're going to work with people from Australia or Canadians. You really get to know each other. I think without that work aspect, you're simply a tourist. So this is a very important aspect of our program, is the ability to work and travel as much as you want for the duration of your stay. I think too that the ability to move around a country freely and work where you want gives you a chance to explore, to find out, what part of a country you like. Is it Sydney? Is it Melbourne? Is it Canberra? Do you like beaches, mountains, things like that? And similarly, you can, like Australia, we're a vast country, small population, vast territory, with 3 oceans. And you can go from, Prince Edward Island, to the north, to Vancouver, and everywhere in between. Wanted to talk a bit about the value of international experiences. And these are some of the findings I've gathered from getting to talk to young professionals such as yourselves. Besides immersing yourself in new cultures, the program really gives you a better chance to see how a different place works, how the business community is different, what is the work-life balance between, home and where you're visiting. What does that mean? Also, maybe not so much between Australia and Canada. You often, with our partner countries, get to practice a different language. On a beaucoup de jeunes Canadiennes qui vont en France ou un autre pays francophone auquel on a une entente. Donc, c'est une possibilité de pratiquer votre français ou pour les Canadiens francophones de pratiquer une autre langue comme Espagne, anglais, Allemagne, et n'importe quoi. but I won't dwell too much on language differences between Australia and Canada. I'll leave it there for now, eh? I think it's important too that when you travel, and probably Melissa could speak to this, that when you're working and traveling, it's a good opportunity to think of all the other skills that you're picking up. And sometimes you might not realize that until you've returned home or you're able to use them in a different setting. You're learning to think critically about the experiences you're facing and adapting your own mindset to meet these new challenges. You're certainly facing a lot of different risks. You know, you're going to a new place, settling in. You're being forced to resolve issues on the fly when you encounter new problems and new situations. You're taking initiative and meeting new people and environments you might not have faced back home. I think especially important, and I've seen this personally, because I've had my own youth at home that have traveled abroad, is that you build resiliency as you face different cultures and you learn adaptability. And those are very important. And certainly as an employer, these are skills that we look for in our future employees. You know, the ability to think critically, be adaptable, flexible, and have really good interpersonal communications. And certainly I can attest to the importance of formal education. It's not the be all and end all. Don't underestimate the value of these soft skills or global competencies in the business world and in your own life. With that, I'd like to return it to Melissa. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Clark. I appreciate that. That was great. I think, I think, you know, we talk about the working holiday visa program, but it is a gateway to other things. It's not just going over to a country and working, you know, working off your holiday. Some people stay, as we'll hear in just a moment. There's a lot of employment opportunities in these countries, and the resiliency and the other sort of soft skills that I think people pick up. So you make some really great points there. So I'm going to sign off and hand the reins over to Lori. Like I mentioned, Lori is one of our co-chairs for the Young Professionals Committee. Before that, she was part of the Canada Committee. So she's been volunteering with the Chamber for quite some time. And as many know, we are a volunteer organization, a not-for-profit. We have about 60 volunteers across both countries. So Lori, over to you to moderate this interesting conversation.
Thanks so much, Mel. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us at today's event. I've had the fortune of working and studying abroad extensively whilst I was at university. So today's topic is one that I'm super interested in and one that's very close to my own heart. So before we commence the panel discussion, I will just briefly introduce two other speakers at today's event. So our first speaker is Jacob Huesler. He's the Executive Director at AFL Canada, and also my partner in crime, the other co-chair of the CACC's Young Professionals Committee. As part of Jacob's role as Executive Director at AFL Canada, he works as the AFL Canada's official international affiliate. He hails from regional Victoria, and he relocated to Canada in 2014 and now resides in Ottawa. So welcome, Jacob. And our second speaker for today's event is Perma Dunbar. So Perma is a Senior Policy Officer for the Victorian Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions, and has a particular focus on the defence, aerospace and aviation industry. She's originally from Toronto and moved to Sydney in 2011 on academic exchange and permanently relocated to Australia in 2018. Perma currently lives in Geelong, which is in Victoria. So welcome, Perma.
Thank you, Larry. Honored to be here.
So yeah, let's get started. So I wanted to take our three speakers for today's session back to the very beginning, back to when I guess you first decided that you wanted to work abroad, study abroad, or live abroad in Australia and Canada, respectively. I guess it would be really useful for our speakers, for our attendees to, I guess, hear about why you decided to move abroad, to study abroad in Australia and Canada.
Yeah, I can start off there, Laurie. And yeah, just before I get stuck into it, a big shout out to obviously yourself and the rest of the Young Professionals Committee. I've had a bit of a background and insight into how much work's gone into this event. So well done on getting it all together. It's amazing. My personal intention all throughout high school and university was always to go and travel abroad. I didn't really specifically pick Canada until quite late in the process because it was a multi-year process. But from a broader perspective, I really wanted to, and I would say, achieve that, get an idea on different cultures and how, there is a difference in even similar countries like Canada and Australia. Just down to it, even the specifics. Like I started working in schools when I first moved to Toronto. And it was -25 outside, and these kids are running around at recess. Like I couldn't believe it. Like there is a resilience to that as well. But it really goes back to travel. There's an old saying that goes along the lines of travel is the only thing you spend money on that really makes you richer. I think that's tenfold when you set up roots in a country, because it really does, as Clark was saying, it fosters that independence. You do build a lot of resilience. You really do. Get yourself in some pickles from time to time. That getting through those is a massive achievement just from a problem solving standpoint. I always say I've got a young daughter now, and my biggest learning, I'll be super proud of her if she can get to an airport in a country, not speak the language, not have any Wi-Fi, and find herself from an airport to a hotel. I think that's an amazing skill. So that's what I wanted to achieve when I first started out on this journey. And even still, like I've been traveling today, and it still gets me excited, and I still get very proud of myself every time.
Paroma, do you have anything you want to add to that about your experience coming to Australia?
Definitely. So I guess when you say the idea of traveling as a tourist, that, it really broadens your horizon. But to uproot your life and to live and study or work abroad for several months, or in my case, years, is entirely different. So living abroad really helps put things in perspective, because you're constantly learning, as we've talked about before, learning new things about your surroundings, and you might find yourself feeling a little bit nostalgic from time to time for your homeland. But I think that really helps you take not those experiences for granted. And whenever you go back home, then you kind of really appreciate those kinds of things. So I guess my kind of introduction to it was I saw the academic exchange offer at Carleton University. And I thought Sydney, Australia was, the farthest place you can go from Ottawa. So then I thought, why not? And it was very competitive to get in, and just the stars aligned, and someone had pulled out last minute, and I was able to take advantage of the opportunity and just haven't looked back. It's been amazing.
Definitely. And then you ended up moving to Australia.
I didn't think that would happen, to be honest.
Definitely changed your life, the academic experience. Amazing. I guess just like in leading on from that question, would you say that your time abroad changed your career path and who you are today? Jacob, I'm directing that question to you first.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So my background, I got a Bachelor of Physical Education from the University of Ballarat, and one thing that I think I was very focused on when I started out that journey. So I started as a teacher in Daylesford, just outside of Melbourne, 40 minutes outside of Melbourne, and I was very unilaterally focused on my career in that field. I wanted to be, a leading teacher. I wanted to be a principal, all of that sort of thing. And even though I'm still in the sports industry, I feel that so I came through the working holiday visa program from Australia to Canada. I lobbed in Toronto with not really much going on. So you sort of had to be a little bit resourceful. So what I found it really opened me up to different experiences, and you have to take the opportunities that you get. So you develop different skills. Like I had never done sales before I moved into my job at X Movement in Toronto. So you develop those skills, and it definitely changes the career path you're on. So now in this role at AFL Canada, which has been amazing. You know, it encompasses all those things I've learnt from this process. It's all around sales, it's all around event management, operations, and all those sorts of things. So as it stands, yeah, I would have to say 100%. I don't see myself getting back into teaching in the short term. That's for sure.
Definitely. Well, you'll be teaching your little daughter as she grows up, so you can definitely use those skills in that way.
How to kick a footy, right?
Yeah, exactly. What about yourself, Paroma? Would you say moving to Australia changed your career path?
100%. I think my career aspiration was always to work for government. I remember telling my dad when I was little that I want to be prime minister, and I thought that I'd speak French. I can convince these people to vote for me here and what have you. But after completing an undergraduate degree in North American politics, I thought I'd expand my knowledge a little bit and specialize in Asia Pacific at Australian University. After I did that, I thought it was best to return to Canada because I had Canadian citizenship, whereas I don't have Australian citizenship. So those kind of limitations, I thought, best to work for the Canadian government at that point and, really go on to become prime minister, right? So I thought I'd do that. Unfortunately, no such opportunity arose. So I ended up working in guest services and ticketing for the Art Gallery of Ontario and Roy Thompson Hall. But my partner visa was approved in 2018. And as soon as it was, I got on the first flight back. And within a couple of months, I was able to secure a professional role in business development. And then I later landed a role with the state government of Victoria. And I went on to study space studies and space operations. And that helped me being offered the role that I now serve today. So that's defense, aviation, and aerospace for the state government.
Do you have any aspirations to become the Prime Minister of Australia now?
Oh, I've got 2 kids now, so your priorities start to change. But in terms of feeling nostalgic and that kind of thing, I actually teach French to the daycare students there. So it's quite exciting to be able to still be involved and utilise mon français un petit peu.
Definitely. So just, I guess, bringing Clark into the conversation, as part of your role at IEC, you would have no doubt, I guess, interacted with a lot of people from all across the world who have come to Canada to commence their working holiday experience. I guess in your interactions with people like potentially Paroma and Jacob, would you say that for them, their experience in Canada, I guess, changed their career path or just changed who the person they are today?
Certainly, a lot of the messages that both Paroma and Jacob shared are similar ones we've heard from other youth who come thinking they're going to do one thing, maybe work on a ski hill or go somewhere and do something, and then realize that I can go to Toronto, I can go to, Calgary, I can go to Halifax and try something different than what I had intended to do. And maybe it's that ability, to take a risk, to try something else and succeed or fail, because you'll learn equally as much from failure in trying different things. So certainly, and I think giving yourself that chance to succeed and or fail, you can learn a lot from it.
I think that mentality is really important, especially when you're going abroad. At least I found for myself when I worked and studied abroad, that I think the failures actually teach you a lot as a person and helps you grow a lot. Like, it might be difficult at that time, but in hindsight, you realize how much it taught you. So I guess going back to, when you first started to consider moving abroad, Paroma and Jacob, I guess to our attendees today, what are the important things you think you should know before considering a move to Australia and Canada?
You can go if you like.
No, after you.
I was just going to say the coffee's terrible over here. Just be wary of that. The other, more simplistic thing is winter is no joke. So you do have to prepare for that. But from a realistic going through the process point of view, my recommendation is to definitely go through the proper process when we're talking visas, sorry, in due course. There's a lot of people that I've had experience with that, book a flight, then start the visa process, then try to come over here as a visitor, and it's just a nightmare. Be prepared and do all the steps that you have to properly. As Clark was saying, that if you can get a connection with one of the ski hills or one of the companies that sort of tries to recruit out of Australia, that's an amazing platform. And this is obviously a one-way conversation with my experience, Australia to Canada. And then I've had the experience as well where a lot of people will, work in Banff or work in Whistler or something like that, and then branch out into different areas as well. So yeah, go through your process properly. Don't try and rush it, because there is obviously, moving internationally is a big deal. And then try and get your connections before you come over as well. I'm sure, like I know in my position, I have people reach out all the time saying, hey, I want to move to Canada. I'm very passionate about Australian football. What do you recommend? Is there a local club or something like this? And, in my experience, 9 times out of 10, people are really happy to have those conversations with people willing to come over.
Definitely. Proma, how was your, experience in terms of moving from Canada to Australia? I know you first came here on academic exchange, so I guess the university would have played a big part in your, move to Australia at that stage.
Yeah, it definitely did do a fair bit. So the first time I came here was in 2011, and at that time there was a lot of prep work involved. So you had to figure out the courses that you'd be taking, whether they be applicable to your degree, being able to demonstrate why it would be applicable, being able to make those contacts. So a lot of background work before you were able to even conduct the rest of the journey. The hotel, in terms of the accommodation rather, that was all dealt with by the university academic exchange. So I didn't really have to do all that much about that. There was the visa that I had to arrange, but the partner visa that came afterwards, that was a lot of paperwork. It's no small feat. But the one thing I would like to mention as well, if I could, we're talking about, an academic exchange in your undergrad. At this point, in my experience anyway, I was in my early 20s when I first moved to Australia. And that's such an important time in a person's life where you really kind of find out who you want to be. You determine how you like to live your life, what you aspire to do, the person you want to be. And so that definitely had a really strong role to play, being such an influential time in my life. My family was over 15,000 kilometers away, so I didn't really have anyone to talk to or to really rely on. And so I guess to Jacob's point, it really makes a difference to be able to kind of set yourself up a little bit in advance, make some connections before you go, some soft leads, and that really does help you to have someone to contact or to get in touch with. And I tend to find that Canadians and Australians, we are very similar kind of people. So as you said, Jacob, 9 times out of 10, everyone's really happy to have a cuppa or have a coffee. And of course, Melburnian coffee is much better. So I'm sure you missed that. So it's really good.
There are, even if you're not coming through an academic process, there are other resources. Obviously, you have the chamber here, and then even sort of less formal resources as well, where you can really get up-to-date information. Even groups like, depending on where you're moving, like there's Facebook groups with 10,000 people of causes in Toronto or something like this, and I'm sure there's the same in Melbourne. So there is, it is a big deal moving overseas. There's no doubt about it. So obviously be prepared and do all the research that you can. And there's several really good resources to get as much information as possible.
Definitely. And I find that everyone's always happy to talk about their overseas experiences. It's always a very significant period of time for anyone who's gone overseas exchange or studied abroad. So they're always happy to share any advice. And like Jacob said, there's so many resources available, like the CACC and just Facebook groups where, from what I can tell, everyone's always chatting about their experiences. People are putting questions up on Facebook and they'll get answers by people who've gone and done the same thing. One of the points that both Jacob and Proma raised was the importance of preparing well before moving abroad. And I guess the amount of paperwork involved in terms of being able to get a visa. Clark, would you be able to, share an insight, from the International Experience Canada perspective, in terms of how long the process would take. And for our attendees in today's session, I guess, when should they start preparing?
Thank you for the question. An application to come to Canada through International Experience Canada can take, as little as 20 days and as long as 56 days. Our service standard is to provide the letter of introduction, the LOI, that is commonly known as, to all successful applicants by 56 days. We're fortunate in terms of the process itself. It is 100% online. When we use the word paperwork, in our case, it is digital files that everything is just uploaded to our department here in Ottawa. So it's a pretty streamlined process, and the requirements are very well laid out on our website.
Okay, amazing. I guess going back to, Perma and Jacob's experiences moving abroad to Australia and Canada, is there anything you wish you knew, before going abroad?
French. Yeah, living in not so much in the western parts, but definitely the further east I've moved. So I started my journey in Toronto, and it wasn't mandatory in Toronto, I'd say, but it definitely would have helped in aspects of so my job was in sales to schools, and it just would have helped out. And then I've moved to Ottawa. It's definitely a lot more French in Ottawa, and the further you go, but it's also an amazing opportunity. It's something really cool. I've taken a few lessons. I do my Duolingo most days and those sorts of things. So hopefully I'm getting a little bit better. But yeah, I would, if you have the time before moving over here and you're looking to move into the eastern part of Canada, it's definitely worth it.
Definitely. Would you say that Duolingo classes are helping at all?
Wouldn't have thought.
Not really. Yeah, I find that. Do you find that, Canadian French is very different to the French that you're trying to learn on Duolingo or through the lessons?
Yeah, and Parama and Clark would be much better positioned, but that's the feedback I've had, that the Quebecois French and French are different.
Very different. Do you agree, Parama and Clark?
Definitely. I think even Ontario French is very different from Quebec French. So
would you say basically a mishmash of English and French in Ontario?
Well, actually, I can speak to that. And certainly as someone that grew up in Montreal speaking two languages, and meeting people, whether they're Acadian from Nova Scotia, they speak a bit, their French is somewhat different than what you would hear from someone in New Brunswick. And even within the province of Quebec, having traveled with my parents who were also bilingual to different parts, it's all different. And I think you would say the same for the English spoken, whether it's in Newfoundland or Manitoba, for example. I think that's what makes traveling so unique, is you get to hear about those different those cultural differences even within a country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's always a lot of, sorry,
no, after you.
No, I was going to say, there's definitely nuances in a language no matter where you go.
Definitely. I was just going to say, to add to Clark's point, that there's this saying called anglicisme. So where you're basically using, an English word in a French way. So I'll say this really embarrassing story, so save me here. But essentially, I was living in Montreal, and I had a car puncture, and I went to Canadian Tire, and I said, I've got, in French, I said that I have a puncture, and I had no idea. I made up the word, and the guy looked at me funny, and he just goes, okay, obviously she doesn't know what puncture is in French, but it was quite funny all the same. He gave me quite a bit of empathy, so that was good. But I was going to say to what we were talking about just before, in terms of I guess something that I wish I knew before spending time overseas or abroad. I guess to what Jacob was saying earlier, definitely be sure to be prepared for the cold in Canada. So investing in good quality boots over the winter months, thongs or flip-flops will not cut it. My husband learned this the hard way. And when moving to Australia, to pack shorts and a tee, unless you're moving to the state of Victoria or Tasmania, you may want to get a parka, because the proximity to Antarctica does make it surprisingly cold. And our houses here are not built the same way in terms of insulation. So always really mindful of that. But in terms of Australian specific, of the what seems to be infinite number of dangerous plants, animals, or things that can kill you, it is highly unlikely that you will encounter any aside from the odd kangaroo or snake when you go camping in the bush. On that note, do take care when you are driving on the roads at dawn, dusk, and night in areas known for wildlife to prevent harm to yourself, your vehicle, and the animals around you.
Definitely. I can confirm. I grew up in Sydney. I've never seen a snake. So they're not as common as you might think. And no, you don't really ride kangaroos around. It's not a common form of transport, as I've been asked by my cousins in Canada many times, every single time I visit Canada. So yes, so Canada and Australia are a lot similar than you might actually think. So that's definitely very great. I guess throughout the course of our discussion, so we've now talked about your decision to travel overseas, and I guess what you should do when preparing to move overseas. I wanted to move the conversation towards differences between Canada and Australia for our attendees who are who are interested in moving to Canada or Australia. Proma and Jacob, I guess in your experiences, what would you say are the key differences between Australian and Canadian working environments and lifestyles? So maybe Jacob first, you could talk a bit about what your experience working in Canada has been like.
Yeah, for sure. I will preface it by saying that the majority of I've been over here the best part of a decade now. So the majority of my professional career, I suppose, has been in Canada. So it might be good to bounce some things off Paroma to see if she, has seen the difference as well. But the one thing that sticks out to me with Canadians in any sort of business, and I've had this across the various jobs that I've held, is that relationship building is a really key focus. I find that I held various jobs in Australia as well as I was getting through university. I felt that the transaction, if you will, can be a little bit more abrupt. What is it? Here it is, here we go. Whereas I do find Canadians really focus on getting to know someone, getting to trust someone, and building that relationship before you really go through. So I feel that if you're moving over here, particularly into a sales role, and over here being Canada, particularly in a sales role, really focus on those soft skills that Clark was talking about, like your critical list, sorry, the word's escaping me. The conversational listening is really important, and building relationships is absolutely key. And that's my number one focus in any interaction that I go into now, for sure.
Definitely. Paroma, what advice would you give to Canadians who are looking to come to Australia?
Well, before I get into that, I will definitely say that I agree, Jacob, that 100% is the case. We are very much relationship builders. We tend to like to have a really good, I guess, feel that comfort between each other before we engage in business. So I suppose when dealing with Canadians, it's worth noting that we can be very politically correct, whereas Australians, I find, they kind of tend not to take themselves too seriously, and at times can be sarcastic. And given their dry sense of humor, which can sometimes come across as rude to Canadians, and I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about, because if they've never encountered it before, it can catch them a bit off guard. So I remember we were at the Australian War Memorial, and a server once asked my mom that, if she wanted tomato sauce or ketchup with her fries or her chips. I keep doing the backwards and forwards of Canada and Australian lingo, apologies. Anyway, she replied, "No, thank you, that's fine." And the server looked at her and said, "Good, I didn't want to get it for you anyway." And I still recall the expression on her face. It was priceless. So it's just that kind of humor. And if you haven't seen it before, you can kind of go, "Oh," but it's totally fine. And we explained that to mom, and she kind of went, "Okay, so it's a joke. It's fine." But with respect to lifestyles, I suppose the main difference that I found, and Jacob, hopefully you can test this as well, is that I found that being the proud North Americans that we are as Canadians, we tend to demonstrate just how busy we are. So we'll have a takeaway cup of joe. We're always on the go. We have no interest in slowing down. And this is probably reflective of the fact that on average, Canadians only get about 10 days of annual leave, whereas Australians get 20. So in the lead up to Christmas, it's quite commonplace for Australians to take leave and resume work in the second or third week of January. So Australians tend to be much more laid back, and in every sense of the meaning, they'll happily stop for a cuppa and a very relaxed lifestyle. So you're much more inclined to see us at the beach, or going to talk about how you're having a relaxing holiday with your family, and a very, I guess, that work-life balance seems to be much more in tune in Australia with a family focus, which is really lovely to say. Not to say that that doesn't happen in Canada, but in my experience, it seems to be much more at the forefront.
Definitely.
I would back that up. I would say, and Clark, you might be good to talk about this as well. I've been really lucky with the jobs that I've held over here, that they really put a focus on work-life balance, which has been amazing, and probably been a key factor in helping stay over here as well. My partner's in tech recruiting, and she has been for the last 8 years or so. And they're starting to shift a little bit towards that work-life balance focus, maybe because of experience with Australians and things like this as well. But yeah, absolutely, they're always on the go, Canadians.
Would you agree with that statement, Clark?
Yes, I'll just leave it there and say yes.
Just say yes. Okay.
And I would, and sorry to harp on it, Laurie, I would absolutely agree with Paroma's recommendation. If you are an Australian going to Canada, not that it might not be inappropriate or anything like that, but you definitely need to check your sense of humour from time to time.
Yes, tune the roasting a little.
Yes.
I think in Australia, the more you roast someone, or the more you display your sarcastic sense of humour, the closer you are with someone. But it may not necessarily be appreciated in other countries. Yeah, definitely.
But if I may, I would jump in, and I think that goes back to what I heard from my fellow panelists, and that's part of the research you do when you think of going abroad. And certainly I can recall a long time ago going to Australia for meetings and just doing research on what to expect. And one of the first things I was told, Australians are extremely punctual. They want meetings to start on time. And if you're late, that's considered very rude. So I think today there's a wealth of information out there that you can help avoid some of those missteps, and be prepared to walk in and feel, I think, more part of the working culture than you would before.
Definitely. And I think that's like the conversation we've had about these nuances between Canada and Australia is also really important to show that sometimes you can find information online, but at the same time, when you've talked to someone with the lived experiences, you sometimes learn about the little things that you might not find on a website outlining, say, the process of moving to Australia or Canada, or what accommodation you should be living in, or other things like that. So I think I just wanted to say to all our attendees, if you can establish those connections prior to moving to the country you've chosen, that's really important as well. Let's take a look at the time. I think we have time for one last question before we move on to questions from our attendees. I think in terms of, I guess, to wrap up the conversation, what are the top 3 tips you would share for our attendees today when deciding to make the move abroad, and I guess being able to work across both nations? I'll start with you, Jacob, again.
So I could probably tackle this from a couple of different ways. So if you are looking to work across both Australia and Canada, I've come unstuck a number of times, and this is a real danger zone this next couple of weeks on the daylight saving schedule. So ensure that you get that down. and put it within your put it in your calendar, because that can really ruin some opportunities, really, when you just miss a call because you're an hour late. Again, not necessarily from a beneficial point of view, I would say look for businesses to build partnerships or individuals, that is, with like experiences, with like goals and those sorts of things. So they don't need to be beneficial to your role or anything like that, but it is really good just to chat with people. And this is one of the things that has come up out of my experience with the chamber as well, is just chatting to people who have like experiences and seeing things from a different perspective is amazing. I think I mentioned before that obviously look at the various networks that you can utilize. You know, if it is an informal one like a Facebook group, or a more formal aspect like the chamber or somewhere like that. And then from a more general point of view, the most amazing part, and Clark touched on it before, about moving overseas and moving to Canada in particular, is it is, he meant, I think the phrase was small population, varied landscape or something like that. The most amazing part about Canada is that you can go from the Maritimes to the mountains and find completely different people, completely different landscapes, all of these little hidden gems. Everywhere is just incredible. I haven't found anywhere I haven't loved over here yet. So make sure to make the most of your time. If it is 12 months, if it is the 2 years that you get, if you do end up setting up shop over here, make the most of your time, and don't be afraid of winter. Winter's great. You get out, there's so many activities. It really is a novelty for someone. I grew up in Swan Hill in northern Victoria, which is effectively desert. It really is, you know, your first negative 35-degree day is more fun than anything. So make the most of the experience that you can in every way possible, business, professionally, personally.
Definitely. And I guess the winters aren't that bad, because compared to Australia, at least you have centralized heating. So sometimes it gets even colder in Australia because you don't have the adequate heating.
The winters are what you make of them. I've found if you stay inside and complain how cold it is, then yeah, they suck. But if you get out and, you know, whether you've had the experience before, you learn to ski, you learn to snowboard, ice fishing, tobogganing. There's so many things that you can do. It really is amazing if you make the most of it.
Definitely. What about yourself, Pura? What would be your top 3 tips?
Well, I think Jacob's forgotten ice skating, I'm going to say skating, and hockey. I can think in terms of moving, both nations, as we talked about, has very similar cultures, very diverse people, which is such a blessing, really, to go from one country to another and find so many of the same kinds of people, same kinds of food, the same kinds of things. It's really exciting. There's we're very, both nations are very respectful and tolerant of others. Both, as we discussed, have very unique lifestyles and landscapes and experiences. The thing that I will mention is, I suppose, in terms of a business kind of perspective as well, is to take an interest in the activities. If you're living in Toronto, you'll have to follow the Jays, you'll have to follow the Raptors, you'll have to follow the Leafs. If you're living in Melbourne, you have to know the footy scores before hopping on the elevator or the lift, because it's just something that you do. It's the next thing you talk about after the weather. It's a really good icebreaker. And then I suppose it's just, this I remember this one saying that happened. So we were talking about, you know, the idea of appreciating when you're there for 12 months or things like that. I'm going to Sydney for 12 months. I'm going to really experience it, love it. Great. I never thought I'd be here for the rest of my life, really. So knowing that before doing such a trip or such an endeavor, try and make the most of your time where you are, your home, learn the most you can about it. Go to Niagara Falls as much as you can, or go to wherever you can as much as you can, because you'll miss it. I miss the chipmunks. I miss seeing raccoons. I miss seeing blue jays. It's something that you don't have, and you take it for granted. I remember when I told my mom that I was going away, a friend of hers said to her that, "Oh no, that's it. You're not going to see her again." And it's true that, you know, I never thought I'd be back here again, but here I am, and I've got my 2 kids who were born in Geelong, of all places. No disrespect to Geelong, but never thought it'd happen here, and living near the beach. And so you just never know where life is going to take you. So just, yeah. And especially with COVID and being away from home, I've been now, I think, 4 years consecutively. It's been quite challenging not to be close to home. So just enjoy it while you can, and have fun. It's a great experience.
Definitely. And I think I think living and moving abroad, you also learn to appreciate your trips home as well, and I guess the relationships you have back home. Yeah, so thank you so much for the tips, Paroma and Jacob. I see that Mel has popped back on, so I think that's my signal that we're supposed to move to questions and answers from the audience.
Thanks, Laurie. That was great. It was a really good discussion. I do want to make sure we get to the questions because people that are on here that have posed. So I might start with Jacob. What's the biggest challenge that you faced moving from Australia to Canada? There's one thing that you could really go, wow, I wish I'd known, or this was harder than expected.
The biggest surprise was the much lower wages. So prepare for that. There is a much lower minimum wage across here in Canada, and each province is a little bit different, but that also leads to a much lower cost of living. In terms of challenges, it really is that I found the social aspects. You know, I was lucky to land, and I joined an Australian football club, so I had basically a group of mates straight away. But I have seen people land and not embrace that social aspect, and then you're in a foreign country, no matter how beautiful it is, particularly if, and you know, I don't want to harp on the weather differences, but seasonal depression is a thing. You know, the days are short, the weather does get cold. March rolls around and you have a 15-degree day, which feels like 40 degrees, and then you have 2 inches of snow the next day. So you really do have to lean on the social networks that you can find, for sure. Great,
thank you for that. Clark, I just wanted to bring you into it from a public sector, you know, experience perspective. Do you find it a challenge, or would you know any stats? This information might not even be available to you, but for those Canadians that are coming into Australia within public sector, are there opportunities or a pathway for them to sort of grow their career in so if you're part of the Canadian government, I suppose, and you had experience within the Canadian government system, could you find a pathway into another government like the Australian government? Is it transferable, or you know, I look at public sector like sort of any other sector. If you're mining in one country and have that experience, you know, getting a job in a foreign country like Australia with mining experience, so same kind of idea. Would you have any insight into that?
Well, like I can say that our department, Immigration, Refugees, Citizenship Canada, and its mirror department in Australia, which is the Office of Immigration and I think Naturalization and Citizenship, something along that, actually have an exchange program where people can work in each other's country. And personally, when I was there in the early 2000s, working on the citizenship program, I was struck by how similar a lot of the work was, you know, which isn't surprisingly, being two Commonwealth countries with similar legislation. So I think there are parallels, and certainly there would be opportunities for people that wanted to, you know, start a career. You know, you'd have to keep in mind there's specifics to working for the government. Typically, you have to be a permanent resident or a citizen for full-time work. But again, you know, I always encourage people to look at our websites and, you know, make sure that they take a look at those before making any giant leap across the pond, so to speak.
Yeah, that's good advice. You know, it's interesting because I think, you know, the working holiday visa can be a pathway, like with everybody here, to other opportunities, which is great. Maybe for you, Paroma, what surprised you the most when making, you know, the move to a foreign country? I mean, we've given a lot of advice here today on, you know, if I would have known more or what have you, but when landing, what sort of took you back as the most shocking, I suppose?
I guess positive shocking was the fact that prices that you pay are all inclusive of the taxes. I absolutely love that. I cannot stand every time I go back now and go to, I remember I bought a steering wheel, like a hockey steering wheel for my car at Canadian Tire, and it said, oh, it's $20 or whatever. When I went, okay, fantastic. And I came back to the cash register and it turned out to be something outrageous, an extra, $2, $3. And I went, where did that come from? And then I remember that, that's something that happens here. And then of course, being Canadian, we tend to like to please everyone. So between the British, the French, the American, we have, both imperial and metric measurements between, kilometers per hour, pounds, Celsius, you name it. And so here I just kind of go, oh, that there is one consistent way. And so it's, now you need to go by kilograms. It's something small, but yeah, it's something of a bit of a surprise, I suppose.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Oh, we got one more before we close this off. In overall, can you say this country is better than the other? I'm gonna frame that a little bit slightly different, because somebody's asking here. There's one country that's better. I would say they're different, but maybe just to close it off. Put it more politically correct, perhaps the Canadianism in me is, do you feel you made the right choice going to the other country? And if so, why? So maybe Jacob, I'll start with you.
Yeah, different is a good way to say it. But I 100% think I made the right choice. Not that I don't love Australia, because I clearly do, working for the AFL. But living in Canada where you have legitimate seasons is one of the great things. So it's fall at the minute, and it's absolutely stunning. My family tell me off when I talk to them about fall, and it's autumn. I go, no, it's completely different. It's fall. The colours are popping and all that sort of stuff. And as I said, my which could be an unpopular opinion, but my favourite part of Canada is the Maritimes. But then you have, the Rockies. Then you have, even when you get out to the prairies, it's just so vastly different, as it is in Australia as well. And like they say, the grass is always greener. But yeah, I'm very happy with my decision.
Awesome, thanks, Jacob. Paroma, to close it out.
Equally happy with my decision. I don't think I would have been, doing between a student visa, working holiday visa, student visa again, and then a partner visa, now apply for citizenship. I think that it goes to show that I'm very much vested and committed to staying here. It's been a really great journey. I'm very thankful. I still celebrate Canada Day and Thanksgiving every year, and take those days off to celebrate that with my kids. And it's just, I don't know. I'm very thankful for the experience to be here.
Awesome. So we won't say which country's better, because they're both equally amazing. Look, before I let Lori sort of close this out, I just, from a chamber perspective, this is our first event. This is our first discussion on this topic. There's a lot that we did not cover. You could just go into language differences and regional differences, Perth versus Melbourne versus Sydney versus Brisbane, what have you. There's a lot of stuff we didn't cover. So I think it's important for anyone listening today, if there's questions or feedback, because that will help us determine where we take this conversation. There will be more events, and it's important to understand what everyone's curious about and who they want to hear from. I think when we start down on this path, there's so many options you can take when you start considering a life overseas, whether that's for 6 months, 1 year, or in this case with our speakers, for a more permanent period of time. And what is it like living away from family, and all those other sort of challenges that might come up for a longer term. But as we mentioned in the very beginning, there are 30 partner areas that the IEC has. So it's not just between Australia and Canada. I would really encourage people to look at the other countries as well. I really want to thank everyone for joining us today, because I appreciate Jacob and Clark. It is very late there. So thank you so much. We'll have to maybe switch it up and do an early morning in Canada, late night in Australia, just to make it fair. So over to you, Lori, to say your last remarks before we make it to time.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Mel. Completely reiterate everything Mel has just said about Canada and Australia, and also the CACC. So I just wanted to take this opportunity to to thank everyone for attending today's event, but also special thanks to the amazing Young Professionals Committee volunteers who have played a really big part in bringing this event to life. As Jacob said earlier, a lot does go behind the scenes to make such an event take place. A bit of a promotion for the Young Professionals Committee from the co-chair. So we aim to raise youth awareness about the Australia-Canada relationship. And as Mel said earlier, this is our inaugural event, and we're planning to run more initiatives and events targeted at young professionals interested in the space in the future. So if you would like to get involved, or if you have any ideas about events, what you would like to hear about, who you would like to hear from, please do not hesitate to email global engagement at cacc.com.au. And please also follow our social media handles across Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter to keep an eye out for future events, and also events such as the CACC Signature Initiative, the Australia-Canada Trade Summit, which is taking place next year in March. And I guess with that said, we've reached the end of our panel today. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you've all learned a bit about the differences between Australia and Canada and why you should work, travel and study abroad. And hopefully we've inspired you to take that first step. Thank you very much.